How do we know we're live?
We are now live again.
Are we going to go ahead and get started then, since it's 9:03?
Awesome.
All right. Well, I want to welcome all of you here to our CFLive panel event. My name is Jordan, and we're really excited that you could join us this evening. We're going to be diving deep, as deep as we can go in an hour's time, about three different arguments for the existence of God. And so I want to introduce, though, our panel of people that are going to be joining us tonight. So we'll go around the room here, and if you want to give your name and then maybe a fun fact about yourself.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Eric Semjanow. I'm the campus director at Grandview, and I can do 100 push-ups in 20 minutes.
How many push-ups is that a second then?
Don't do the math.
Yeah. My name is Caleb Robert Thompson. That's pretty information I don't tell very many people that. One interesting fact about me, it's kind of about me, but it's also about my son. We threw around the idea of naming Max, my son, Bear, but we thought it'd be ironic when I didn't hit 5 foot or 100 pounds till the end of my sophomore year of high school. That to call my son Bear and have him be like the smallest human being in the whole entire world.
Yeah.
Oh no, Bear's
Name
coming,
some
guys.
mighty name, and he's just this little guy. Poor guy. Yeah.
Yeah. But maybe his personality would make up for it, you know. Maybe like something like he'd grow into the name with his
He'd
emotional.
still be a bear, just a little smaller bear.
Bear cub.
Yeah. Man cub.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of look like a bear a little bit right now.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And then when he grew in spirit, it would be complete. My name's Grace Ketter-Henry, and I'm a resident with Drake Campus Fellowship. And my fun fact is that these last 6 months, I averaged about probably 2 or 3 loaves of banana bread a month. I did a lot of baking. Shout out to
Wow.
Carpenter Bible Study.
Yeah, way to go.
Wait, yeah, baking or eating?
Baking.
Okay. That's good.
That's good.
All right, and I know I already said my name, but I'm Jordan. I'm a staffer here at Walnut Creek. I serve at the DMAC campus, and fun fact, I don't know, I think I could eat Mexican food for every meal, even breakfast, every day. I never get tired of it. I love it. Breakfast tacos, tacos for lunch, tacos for dinner. Always good, every time.
Are chilaquiles a breakfast food?
What's that?
Are chilaquiles a breakfast food?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sounds good.
They're never mind.
Did you say king?
Chilaquiles, right? They're tortilla chips, and you put an egg on them, and then salsa, and
Oh.
You put an
these
egg on
exist. I
them?
haven't
Sounds
eaten
like
them myself.
Yeah.
I've only heard rumors.
All right,
of
well,
this.
we only have an hour
Oh, my bad.
to dig into this. So, again, we're going to be talking about 3 things, three hills that we ought to climb as believers and unbelievers to really establish a firm foundation of, does God actually exist? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And as we dig through these things, please feel free to leave comments, asking questions in the comments section. We want to, we're going to leave some time in the end and kind of in between to be able to potentially answer some of these questions. And so, and tonight we were thinking, we want this to be an encouraging time for the believer. So call it Shox and Rocks, like a shock, like a spring to kind of uplift the believer, and then rock, like a little rock in your shoe to cause the unbeliever to really think and question and kind of chew on some of these things that we're going to be talking about. Now we only have a limited time, so I think we could spend hours talking about a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And so we're going to delve briefly into these, and we hope that this would be an encouragement for you, and it would really cause you to reflect on God and to really think about the things that we're talking about tonight. So the 3 standpoints that we're going to be talking about is, the first one is the scientific standpoint for the existence of God. The second will be the moral or philosophical argument, and the third will be the historical. So we're going to start off with the first one. Caleb, I believe you're going to start us off with the scientific standpoint.
Yeah. Everybody likes it when I talk about science. So just a little bit of my testimony. When I first became a Christian, just growing up in the culture that we've grown up in, I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Christian environment, and when I started, I grew up in a Christian environment, and when I started to really pursue God, I realized that a lot of what was keeping me from fully investing into the belief in the existence of God was science. I just thought that science and God were at odds with one another, and as I started to research some of these things, and it took me a long time to realize God and science are not at odds with one another. In fact, God and science fit beautifully with one another. And so one thing that really helped clarify the fact that God is real, God is there from a scientific standpoint, was the fine-tuning of the universe. If you look at all of the ways in which the universe has been fine-tuned from a scientific standpoint, it's hard to think of that it just happened by random chance. So first of all, with science, it's the method of testing and proving of things that you can touch or things that you can hold, the physical world. And so just looking out in our little small solar system, because that's, I think that we've sent like machines to Mars, and that's as far as we've gotten. But from telescopes and whatnot, we can't see all that far compared to the vastness of the universe. But in our small solar system, there's 9 minus 1 planets. 9 when I grew up learning about
Rest
planets,
in peace,
and now
Pluto.
and now there's 8 planets, and there's 0 life. Not even like human life, obviously. There's not like any life. There's no plants. There's no animals. There's no single-celled organisms. There's nothing. And so from what we can see, it's like this planet is where life exists, and nowhere else. And it's because our planet has been fine-tuned, and that's the reason that life, we right now exist on this planet, is because it's been fine-tuned. If any of these things were out of tune on an infinitesimal scale, then we would burn up, we would explode, we would cease to exist. Think how intimidating it would be if you were baking some banana bread, and to know that if you turned your oven too hot or it was too cool, that your house would explode, or you would freeze to death and it would cease to exist. Like, that'd be pretty intimidating. So
I live in fear every time I make banana bread for that very reason.
Yeah. But like, if we were closer to the sun, we would burn up. If we were further from the sun, we would freeze to death. If the Earth's crust was any thicker than it is, I believe that we wouldn't be warm enough. We'd freeze to death, because the heat from the core of the Earth wouldn't be able to warm us up. And if the Earth's crust was any smaller, we would burn up. The Earth's rotation, if the rotation of the Earth took longer than 24 hours, the temperatures would become too extreme. If the Earth's rotation was quicker, then the atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. I didn't study this stuff. This is obviously secondary information. I don't exactly understand and know how everything works, and I just want to share a list of all the things that I can't even share with you guys, that I don't really even, I can hardly even say some of these words. But some of the examples of the fine-tuning of the universe, more examples are nuclear force constant. If it got greater or less, we would be destroyed. Gravitational force constant, electromagnetic force constant, radio of electromagnetic force constant, radio of electron to proton mass, expansion rate of the universe, entropy level of the universe, mass density of the universe, velocity of light, age of the universe, average distance between galaxies, density of galaxy clusters, decay rate of protons, and so on
And so like all those things are things. It's not like it's not like what color your car is. Are you saying like all these like different factors are like things that's like if one of them was off, then it's like you don't have like life on Earth as we know it.
No, it seems like what it's communicating is that not only do we not have life as we know it, it's like the whole universe doesn't exist.
Okay. So like what are the odds? Like I think when I was questioning like whether or not God existed, I think I would hear these arguments frequently about like, oh, the odds are so small, but I just kind of like brushed them off and was like, oh, like so what if the odds are really small? Obviously it happened, like, because we're here. Doesn't it, the fact that we exist now prove that no, even if the odds were really small, we just as a species got super lucky? That's the thing that I always like debated about or like questioned when I was questioning this stuff.
Yeah, when I think about this stuff, I try and put myself in the counter, the skeptical mindset, and I guess what goes through my mind is if it's like infinite time in an infinitely huge universe, like aren't we bound to find at least one planet like where there's life?
Yeah.
Because you already said there's like tons, there's like what, I don't know how many aliens, I don't know what started the alien, maybe it's billion, maybe it's trillion or million, I don't know what the alien is, but there's like a lot of planets out there, right?
Lots.
So it's like a lot of them. So maybe just got lucky.
Yeah, well, I think that when we start talking about like things beyond what we can see, what we can feel, what we can experience, when we start talking beyond science in the theoretical realm, then that jumps from science to philosophy, which I know that you're going to touch on that here in a little bit. So we have two conclusions when talking about the fine-tuning of the universe, and the two conclusions are, like you said, chance, or it's design. And it's wild to think about. Just read. I'm going to read this quote from Stephen Hawking real quick, because what you'll see is that the fine-tuning of the universe, the craziness that is the fine-tuning of the universe, it's a real thing, and still some people will land on God exists. The fine-tuning of the universe points to God existing, and then some people like you and your agnostic days would say, I don't know, maybe we're just really lucky. But here's what Stephen Hawking, he was a famous physicist and atheist. He died a couple years ago. He says, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers, talking about the fine-tuning of the universe, seem to have been finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. And so even he says there's a fine-tuning to the universe that's kind of wild. And what he does with this information, it reminds me of Romans 1. Romans 1:25, it says, they exchange the truth for a lie and worship the creation rather than the creator. And so as he viewed all the evidences of the sciences, he teetered toward the lack of existence of God. It's just chance that we exist, and it's amazing that it's chance. Worship the creation, where for me, in looking at all this stuff, I say, man, this points to, I worship God in this. I'm so thankful that God would allow us to live in such a crazy universe, in a world in which we get to interact with one another, not so much right now because of our circumstances, but like, and experience love and experience each other's grace and have fun with one another and make jokes about whatever it is. And so I'm so thankful. I think I think that points to the fact that there's a designer. So.
Absolutely. And I think too, even like not to go too soon into like philosophy, but just even the idea of like how much beauty that there is in like the physical created world that God has made for us. And it's just like it's like failing to acknowledge God, like almost for me it just like stops me from getting to a deeper level of appreciation for it, because it's like we say like the world is here, and then we stop and we say, oh, the world's nice, but there's like even a deeper reason why we can appreciate like this created world, and that's why I think like what you were saying earlier about questioning, like, oh, are like science and religion opposite? Like, well, like God created the world and He created it amazing, and it's like a privilege that we're able to explore it and learn about it and like praise God for the exploration that we have of it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think even like God, in His sovereignty, like what we know through science and like what we've come to understand is just a grace from God. You know, like what He's allowed us to understand about what He's created, and even that is like a privilege and a joy and a grace from God that we can. So like God is not opposed to science. Like Christians are not opposed to science. Like I would say that we're for it. You know.
And even going back to like the Genesis account, like what a gracious God that He gave us. Like He made night and day. You know, He like made the day short enough where we wouldn't burn up to a crisp, and He made the night short enough where we wouldn't freeze to death. You know, like how gracious that He like He's not some cruel God wanting to like torture us or whatever. He's a gracious God that made a world that's like habitable for us.
I just want to, Caleb, was there anything else that you wanted to hit on at all?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about just in brief. Aristotle, he said, the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know. And when we're talking again about science and scientists and the study of everything that there is that we can see and we can feel and that we have right in front of us, every single scientist, there comes a point in time where when you're talking about the infinite bigness that there is, when you talk about galaxies beyond galaxies beyond galaxies, you're going to ask a question where every single scientist will eventually say, I don't know. Or we have a theory about that, but we don't exactly know. And then when you're talking about the infinite smallness of things, you know, you go down from the most simple elements that make up the physical world. When you ask a scientist about something, eventually you're going to come to a place where you're asking about something so small that we haven't even tested the waters in, where they just say, they shrug their shoulders and say, you know, actually we have a theory about that, but we don't know. And when we get into that realm, like I talked about earlier, that is a philosophical argument. When you make claims about what is, based on those things, those theoretical things, you're getting into a philosophical argument, or you're getting into a faith argument. So can science prove the existence of God? Absolutely not. And can science disprove the existence of God? Absolutely not. It's beyond the realm of the tool that science is made for. Science is a tool, and it's supposed to test and approve of the things that we can see, the things that we can feel, and those questions are philosophical.
I think just to add on that, to make it like really clear, like Christians are not opposed to science, because there's like really smart people. I think we were talking about this earlier. There's really smart people that look at the same thing and come to different conclusions. So what is it that's different? The concrete thing that they're looking at is the data, but the interpretation that they have is going to be dependent on all these other factors that they're bringing in. And like everybody's coming in, it's the fancy word for it is presuppositions. You're coming into this and you look at the data with like a certain lens, and like you come in with the objective to either prove God exists or to prove that God doesn't exist. You're going to look at the data and you're going to sway to one way or the other. And that's what people do. So.
And you even run into that like in church history. You think about like Galilean, like the guy basically he proved that guy. Yeah. I was wondering how he got it.
Did he create that song?
He actually wrote that song. Like he was from
wild.
Bohemia. Like it was crazy. It was in his notes. Like on the top of the page was like, does the sun orbit around the earth? And below that was like, will you let me go? No, okay, so Galileo was the guy that like previously to this, like everyone thought, or I guess everyone in the Western tradition believed that all of like the heavenly bodies, so like the sun and the moon, like the different planets orbited around the earth, and then the earth was like the center of the solar system. And then Galileo was the guy that was like, no, actually we all orbit around the sun or whatever. And he was basically like killed by the church at that time because that like was incompatible with their understanding of the universe, and so they saw that as a threat to their faith. And that's not what faith is. Like that's not what Christianity is. It's not like closing your eyes to what the actual universe is about. It's not closing your eyes to like what data tells us. It's just like interpreting correctly with the knowledge that God exists and that God like has like ordered it in a way. So like in the same way that being able to find fossils doesn't disprove that God exists. It's just like, do you take the data correctly and do you bring your presuppositions into it, or do you like use that, like interpret that data as or what is it called, as like objectively as you can.
Yeah.
So, Caleb, thank you for delving into the scientific standpoint. I think someone had talked about, or we had a few questions. Is that correct, Shelby?
Mm-hmm.
Shelby's over there. She's got some questions for us.
Shelby!
This question is from Kevin Henry, and he asks,
Oh.
why should I care about the existence of God?
Great question.
Hey, Dad. Thanks for calling in. Good to see that I still got fans back home. So the question was, why should I care about the existence of God? I think that even like segues into like my like section a little bit. I don't know if you
Definitely.
want to like jump off on that, Jordan.
I think that we should go right into what you were wanting to talk about. I mean, everything that you were going to bring up, I think it will answer that question, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we want to go ahead and we'll transition to our next hill that we ought to climb, you know, is the moral and philosophical standpoint, like how we ought to believe that God exists through that lens. So, you want to go ahead and start it off?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think this is I really enjoyed this topic of how do we know God is real from a philosophical lens, because this is like where I really came at Christianity. You know, this is like the point where there was a point in my life where I was really doubting Christianity. I was really doubting the existence of God, or like even the idea of God. And then it was like more of the philosophical questions that I wrestled through that really gave me, that just like really brought me back to like believing in God, I'd say. And this is the thing, I love science. I'm not as scientifically minded as Caleb is, and I love learning about these things. Something that I like, we were talking about this earlier, but like all of these are like hills that we're trying to get over, right? We're trying to like walk up these hills and see God from the top of these hills. I don't know if I'm stretching this analogy
No,
too
you're
far.
doing great.
Sweet.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Sweet. I think like science, I think the thing I like about philosophy is that it's a hill that is much more short than other hills, I guess I could say, from my mind. Because it's like, you could think about philosophy just like sitting at your chair at home, like lounging back in your chair and like thinking through these questions of like the purpose of life or like morality. And you could just do that just like sitting down and ordering your thoughts and trying to consider the world in a really specific way. Whereas like for me, data, like science is hard because you have to like, I have a hard time reading scientific studies sometimes. You know, I have like a hard time like getting my mind around all these facts about like radio waves and stuff like that. And it's like, I like every time, one of my housemates, like Shannon, is like so sciencey, and every time she teaches me something about science, I'm like, praise God, this is amazing. But it's like, it takes me a while to get to that point to understand it. But basically, so philosophy I like because you can just like sit down and think through things, and it's just like a really appealing thing. And so for me, the biggest two, I guess like before we even start, I'm going to be using two terms like pretty like liberally here, and so I just wanted to define them before I start. So this idea of objectivity and subjectivity, and I think the biggest reason I believe in God, like the biggest evidence that I have for believing in God, goes in with the question from you, Dad, or Kevin, is like the belief in God changes like every single minute of your life. You know, it changes how you decide to make decisions about things that happen to you in the short run, but also things that happen to you in the long run. Like, what do you do with your life? Like, even the day-to-day, like, do you decide to cheat someone in business? Do you decide to be honest with your friends? Do you decide to take time to be generous to people? It, like, changes all those, like, little decisions, and it even changes big decisions, like, what do I study? Like, what do I do with my life? Like, where do I live? Like, what am I going to do with my life? And so that's why I think knowing about God is important, because it's like whether or not God exists sets the context for how we live our lives. You know, we don't want to be living from one context. If there was like a context where like, oh, you win at life by like collecting the most like snow globes, then like everyone should be like collecting snow globes. You know what I mean? But if like that's not the case, it would be really sad if a person like spent their entire life collecting snow globes and like there was no reason to collect snow globes.
No offense if you collect snow globes.
Yeah.
But that reminds me of a quote, I think it's from the very beginning of Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer, and he says that the most important thing about somebody is what comes to their mind when they hear God. Because what you can tell is that's going to be a lens, that's going to be a filter through which you live all of life. If God is real, then it sort of defines the trajectory of your life. But if God's not real, then, you know, like, go do what you want. That's sort of like the fork in the road here, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, totally. And so for me, like the two biggest like issues in philosophy that like for me convinced me that God like has to be real is the idea of morality and then the idea of a purpose in life. And so before I get into that, just like defining terms. So the idea of objectivity. So Merriam-Webster dictionary just like defines objectivity in a lot of different ways, but just so we're all clear on terms. So the one that I'm going to be using is of, relating to, or being an object, phenomenon, or condition in the realm of sensible experience, independent of individual thought and perceptible by all observers, aka having reality independent of the mind. So these like men that are in the room with me and the women that are in the room with me, I don't know if they're on camera right now, like all these people, they are objective, like they are objectively people. Like if I was not here in this room observing them, they would still exist.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see you guys, I can hear you guys, but like even if I couldn't, you guys are real. So subjectivity though is like the opposite, where it's characteristic or belonging to reality as perceived rather than independent of the mind. And so something that is subjective is like your favorite ice cream, your favorite sports team, like things like that aren't actually, there's nothing concrete in the world that says like, oh, this is truth. It's just like it exists within your mind. And the reason this is important is because I think a world without God makes it impossible to have objective morality or an objective purpose in life. And so just to start off, morality was like a really big deal for me. So that was like the idea that right now, currently what I believe is that God created the world and he is a good creator and he's powerful. And he made everything that we can see, even kind of what we were talking about. He made like the universe, the cosmos, like perfectly in order so that we could like have life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But he also like created us, and he created us with this sense of right and wrong with us, a sense of morality. And the reason he did that is because it reflects his morality. And so like kind of what we were saying before about Genesis, like he created a world that was bountiful, and he created a world that was like able to like foster us and like not kill us on sight. You know, we don't freeze at night, we don't burn during the day, because he's good and he loves things that are good. So he loves kindness, he loves generosity, he loves harmony, he loves peace, he loves all these like good things that we, regardless of our background, we also love. You know, like there's a lot of different cultural things where you could say like, oh, this is good, this is bad, but there's a lot of objective things. No matter what culture you go to, like being kind to another person is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people have to acknowledge that. But God also hates evil. So God hates like injustice a lot. He hates I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
Racism.
He hates racism,
Murder.
prejudice, murder.
Yeah.
He hates evil. And I think like all of us have this innate sense in us of good and bad. And like to some extent these things are informed by our cultural background. So for example, me living in the West in the 21st century has informed what does it mean, what is kindness in my cultural context. But that doesn't change the fact that kindness is good and it's wrong to be like cruel to someone. But the issue is like without God, I find it almost impossible to believe that there is objective morality. So like here's a quote from Michael Ruse, who's just describing what the basis of morality is for a person that won't believe in God. So the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. And so the whole point of illusory, the idea it is completely subjective. There's not a anchor tying you down to anything. So if you could imagine like a boat at sea, if you have an anchor putting you on one spot, if you have one spot in the middle of the ocean that's truth and it's goodness, that anchor is keeping you there. And that would be saying, oh, there's something objective like holding you. And maybe your boat is like shifting around in a storm, but you're still like anchored to this one objective right and wrong. But if you don't have any anchor, you don't have any objectivity, then you're just like a boat floating around the storm. And you could say, oh, I'm in one spot of the ocean or whatever. I'm in one spot of the ocean. I'm in another spot. It doesn't really matter where you land. And I think that causes a lot of issues, which I feel like a lot of us can acknowledge. Like so many problems come up when you think that morality is just subjective. Part of that's like, I think like a really good example of that is perhaps, I think like the most clear example, like let's take Nazi Germany or something like that. You can look at the anti-Semitism during this time, and you can look at the Holocaust, and you can say, we can all look at that and say, oh, they were objectively wrong. But from their own cultural context, like from their subjective perspective, they viewed that as like, oh, this is right and this is good because we're doing it for our country, we're doing it for all these different things. But I think we can say even if the Nazis had won World War II, if they had conquered the world, like regardless of if they were the ones calling the shots on how history was told or what kind of narrative was told, we could say no matter what people believed about that time in history, what was being done in Germany during that time was evil and wrong. So.
And I think that when we look at things like that, if there are no objective, like if there's no objective morality, then we have no right to be angry when someone is like has ill behavior or is doing wrong to either us or someone else, because there's no basis or grounds for that. You know, it's like it's all dependent on what they think is right. You know, and so. If that's true, if we believe that to be true, then we could never be mad when someone does something wrong. Or
you can't get mad at me if I punched you in the face because I felt like it. You know.
Well,
I mean, you couldn't get mad if I punched you back either.
But it's like you have no grounds.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the grounds to like actually oppose that what I did was wrong.
Right.
Because it wasn't wrong to me.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Whereas the Christian perspective would say, like, we need to like respect like the value and the dignity of like human life and like human faces or whatever, you know, like not punching each other is like an objectively like a good thing to do, you know.
And I guess just to even go further into that is like nobody can actually like if you take God out of the equation, it sounds super insulting, right? So insulting to say that without God morals cannot exist. So like if you don't believe in God, you must not have morals. It's like it's not a denial that morals are out there. I think the whole world has morals, but that's the point. We're arguing that morals do exist, and that we do think that doing certain things are wrong, and therefore, like if I do punch Jordan in the face, I might tell myself it's not wrong, but like deep down in my heart, there's a level of conflict happening there, and if God's not real, how do I explain why that level of conflict is there? And that's the tension that the moral argument, I feel like, is trying to grasp, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I agree. And I think that's like a thing as well, like a person without a belief in God could behave in a very similar way as I can. And I'm like I'm pretty much positive that there are people that don't believe in God, or like even like don't believe in the God that I believe in, that might be kinder people or like more patient people, or they might be more giving than I am, you know. And like that's like to my shame for not like allowing my faith to transform my life more. But I'm sure that there are people that don't come from my background that do better things. The issue is that like without God, like I don't believe it's an internally consistent reasoning for them to actually do those good things, and that would be my issue. But like I definitely believe like I don't think that there are like I don't want to equivocate. I don't want to say that people that don't believe in God are Nazis. You know, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I don't believe that without God, I don't think that there is a reason to say this is good and this is bad, to the detriment of everyone, I think.
I guess like I feel like we should kind of like drill down exactly to why what is why is killing somebody wrong? Like how would a Christian answer that question versus how would an atheist answer that question? Why is killing wrong?
Absolutely, that's a good one. And so like I think like the most simple explanation from a Christian perspective is that like all humans were created in the image of God, and like all humans, regardless of their background, regardless of their like economic status, their country of origin, their like ethnic group, like regardless of like what language they speak, regardless of what their job is or what their interests are, they all have this like objective value that can't be pinned down to anything that they do or like any identity that they hold to themselves, because like being a human, they are created in the image of God and they have that value then. And then the issue, a big issue that I have with a worldview that doesn't acknowledge God, is I don't think there's any objective reason to say, oh, this is why human life is valuable, this is why human dignity is valuable.
Can we go back to the quote by Michael Ruse?
Yeah.
The position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than human hands and feet and teeth, considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something. Ethics is illusory. Is he right? If God doesn't exist, is he right?
It's hard. That's a question that I think I have a hard time with that question too, because as I was like prepping for this and thinking through it, it's like, okay, how do I like sketch out? Could I like sketch out a situation where it's like, okay, imagine the world exactly as it is now, but there's no God in it, and I think like that's impossible. You know, I think like the world that I think it would be impossible for us to have a world that we live in now without God. Like from partially scientific reasons that you said before, but even just like the fact that people like care for each other and self-sacrifice for each other is evidence that like these would be things that wouldn't exist, I don't think, in a world without God. And so it's hard for me to say like, oh, this would be how the world is without God. But I think like it definitely is a viewpoint that many people have. You know, that we've evolved a morality as like a societal or a species.
It's a new word. Yeah.
Shakespeare did it right.
Yeah.
Like as like a species, like, oh, it's just like a lot of people would argue that morality is an effect of like allowing our species to survive for longer. And I think that just doesn't take into account, like I said before, like self-sacrifice, you know? So you see people laying down their life for one another, and even if that benefits the species as a whole, it doesn't benefit the individual at all. And because we're like conscious beings and we can think like, oh, like I can understand before I sacrifice for another person. Wait, even if I sacrifice myself for another person, this life is the only thing I really have, and if I sacrifice myself, I don't get, there's no reason for, I would get no benefits except the dying happy thought that I've like saved another person, which is nice, but then I don't even have that anymore because I've died. And I don't think a purely evolutionary standpoint accounts for that very well.
Mm-hmm. I know you're talking a lot about the moral standpoint. What about like purpose in life? Like, can you talk a little bit about that as well?
I'd love to. I'm clearing my throat because I have a quote that I could read. I don't know if it's like the right time. It might be kind of a Debbie Downer, honestly. Do you guys feel?
I think we can trust you in that, but
Do we want to go to questions?
Oh yeah.
yeah, I think that would be a good place to start. Shelby, do we have some other questions?
Yeah. This one is from Barrett E. He says, how should an integrative perspective of science and faith in God look like when dealing with skeptics who regularly cite natural science to rationalize rejecting God?
Can you say that second
Oh.
part? Who rarely?
In the first part.
Yeah.
And the middle part.
One more time, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah, one more time.
How should an integrative perspective of science and faith in God look like when dealing with skeptics who regularly cite natural science to rationalize rejecting him?
Who rarely cite natural science to reject him?
Regularly.
Regularly.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that this goes like with what Eric's going to talk about here in a couple minutes. So I don't know if you just want to segue right into your.
I could. I feel like.
Can I bridge something?
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
I think I'm good on the long quote. I think this is a great question. I've got a bridge actually. So I think like this question, Barrett, is really similar to like a lot of what Caleb was talking about. Like I don't think the sciences are equipped to deal with like these kind of questions, you know. And so I think like integrating it, it's like I think we should have a good knowledge of science, and we should be able to like talk intelligently about like sciences. You know, like I think for me, I don't know how you guys were, but when I was questioning faith, it really like discouraged me, and I really discounted a lot of Christians that didn't have their science right, even though I didn't know a lot about science. But if I saw any loophole, I would take it. So like knowing your science is really important. An analogy that I really like is this idea of that like really connects to what Eric's going to say, I think. So it's the idea that like a lot of people think that finding out about God, like the existence of whether or not God exists, is like you're on an island and you have a boat. And they think, oh, I can just paddle and I'll get to another island. And that would be like trying to discover God or disprove God using purely science. It'd be like, oh, I'm just going to like hop in my boat and like paddle around until I find an island. And if I don't find an island, there's no island. But in fact, like the relationship between us and God is not like us and another island. It's like the relationship between Shakespeare and Hamlet. And so the only way that Hamlet the only way that Hamlet would be able to sorry, the only way that Hamlet would be able to realize that there was Shakespeare who would take the place of God in this analogy is if Shakespeare wrote himself into the story of Hamlet, and then he could discover him. And I don't know, maybe that's like a good transition point, but like, it's like Shakespeare would have to go into the story. We couldn't like explore around the world to find him unless Shakespeare chose to.
Yeah, that's a super good way to kind of hit into this way, because what I wanted to talk about was like a historical, theological approach to basically breaking down. It's like the question, what are the questions that you guys instantly think of? Like, if I hold up a Bible, like, and say, this is the Word of God, like, I don't know, what are your skeptical questions about that?
Well, I think, talking about the Bible, a question that we get a lot is, how can we trust it if, people wrote it, and it's written for man,
Right.
so how do we know that it's actually true?
Yeah.
People lie a lot, they make things up, how can we possibly rationalize that?
What's consistency?
And like, who decides what gets to go into the Bible as well? You know what I mean? It's like there's like a lot of things that people say is holy or it's not holy, and like that ranges from areas between like, I don't know if there's other books like in the Bible, but it's like how do you know that was written by God, but like someone in a different region of the world at a different time in history didn't receive something from God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we absolutely have to be skeptical of that stuff. So we have to ask those questions. And like the first thing I think of is like Scripture itself. Like it says that all Scripture is God breathed. It makes the claims that the Bible is God's word. But like, what use is that isn't that just like a book claiming its own authority? It's like kind of circular. It's like, how can I trust that? So I think what I want to do, I wish I could talk as fast as you, Grace, so I can hit as much
It's a curse.
information.
It's a curse.
Eric, just talk for the next hour.
Someone
at the
It's
bank
fine.
yelled
It's
at me
fine, right?
today.
Everyone's gonna keep watching.
My brain can't sprint that fast. Like, it's crazy.
It's a gift, I think.
Yeah, it is a gift. It's for sure a gift. But I guess to answer the question, is like, let's go into what makes the Bible the Bible. So there's a thing called canonization. So there's the New Testament, the Old Testament canon. There's 66 books. So just real briefly, it is absurd. There's 66 books. It's written over 2,000 years. There's over 40 authors, and yet there's still a very consistent theme, one theme from Genesis to Revelation all the way through, and it's all pointing to Jesus, right? But within that, let's just go. I'm gonna skip a few things. But the New Testament canon, what goes into making the official books of the New Testament the official books, right? Because there's lots of things that were written. One of the most important things to hit on is the who wrote it, who was the author, and the apostles were the authors of all of the New Testament books, or somebody that hung out with the apostles a lot, basically. So the way that Scripture treats apostles in the New Testament is the same way, authoritatively, that the Old Testament treats the prophets. So the prophets in the Old Testament were a mouthpiece of God, and the apostles taught with a sort of authority in the New Testament. So no books basically are like instantly discredited if they're not connected to an apostle. So you have Peter, you have Paul, they're all sort of, they're actually uplifting each other and giving each other more credibility within their own letters.
I do have a question about that. Were there I know there were like prophets in the Old Testament that were like false prophets, or there would be prophets that like were prophesying and they didn't it wasn't true, they didn't speak for God. Were there people that claimed to for the New Testament? Were there people that like claimed I'm like an apostle, or like I like do speak for God, but they didn't?
Yeah, there's false teachers all throughout the history of Scripture, and people claiming to speak for God when they weren't speaking for God. So what makes these guys like actually right? Well, if you look at the Old Testament, so one of the ways you could look at it is internally say, does the New Testament use the Old Testament and treat it like Scripture?
Mhm.
One of the main things you could do there is look at Jesus. Jesus and the New Testament authors, they quote the Old Testament 295 times. And they quote the Apocrypha, which is a collection of books that may be in question, right? Is it legit or not? Well, one of the factors that goes into that is, well, Jesus and the New Testament authors, they quote the Apocrypha, the apocryphal writings, 0 times in the New Testament. So it's like, that's one way of testing it. And we probably can't go too deep into it because I gotta cover some ground here. But the New Testament, yeah, written by apostles or connected to apostles. Luke wasn't an apostle, but he hung out with Paul. Mark wasn't an apostle, but he hung out with Peter. Jude was the brother of James, which was the brother of Jesus, who was an apostle in Jerusalem. And then there's Hebrews. Who wrote Hebrews? Actually, people don't know who wrote Hebrews. A lot of people think it's Paul. It's a really interesting one because throughout all history, people have basically come to conclusions like, we don't know who wrote it, only God knows who wrote it. But it is like undeniable, like the innate nature of what the book of Hebrews says, like, this is so clearly God's word.
Do you think he knew, whoever wrote it, do you think he knew the other like people during that time? Like, do you think they were all Hebrews?
Yeah, no, they were all contemporaries. They were, and there's evidence to suggest that they were passing all this stuff around, even within like Jesus's contemporaries. So, you know, the lifetime that Jesus would have lived. These books in the New Testament were being passed around with people that would have been Jesus' age. So that's not much time at all. I mean, so I guess let's kind of go into I have 3 tests of historicity that really go into this. There's a bibliographical test, an internal evidence test, and an external evidence test. So what these are doing is they're trying to test the reliability of Scripture itself based on anything and everything. The bibliographical test, the main idea there is that it wants to just test the reliability. Is the Scripture that they were reading way back then the same Scripture that we're reading today? Like, how can we trust all the translations and all that stuff? I know I've talked to a lot of people with that question. In short, it is. It's the almost exact same, like very, very, very minute changes. And we can praise God for that. Internal evidence test.
Can you just talk just briefly about what the changes are? Like,
Yes. Yeah. Little changes, just like, it's more like punctuation. Like, that's more what we're talking about.
A comma though could mean so many things.
That's a good point. I'm not. I don't want to go into that. I don't think.
If you're texting someone, a comma means a lot. If you're writing a book, probably means.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry.
The words are pretty much the same. Like, I say pretty much. They're the same.
Like, let's eat grandma, or let's eat comma.
No doctrines
Yeah.
are changed. It's minor spellings.
Yes.
It's punctuation, etc.
Yes, the littlest of things, not changing the meaning of the text. So there's internal evidence test, which really, for example, that's kind of saying, does the Bible contradict itself? Is it, so we have 4 gospel accounts that we call Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do they conflict with each other? Are there contradictions? And what you'll find is that they actually really harmonize together. And beyond that, we can praise God that we have 4 accounts of Jesus' life instead of 1,
Right.
because they create an even more complete picture and they actually complement each other.
Yeah.
Right.
So you wouldn't expect that all accounts would be the same exactly. If 4 witnesses came to the stand from witnessing, a murder, they're not going to give point 1, point 2, point 3, like all the exact same things. They're going to give their account of it, and so majority will be like the same. but there might be slight differences here and there based on perspective or anything like that.
Or what they thought was important.
Yeah,
Mm.
emphasizing certain points above others.
Yeah.
And that's what we find in the Gospels for sure. Because the writers of the Gospels clearly had, you know, some were more up here, some were more in here, like, and they focused on different things.
Yeah.
And then there's external evidence test, which is basically looking at all the other things that came out around the same time, ancient documents. Did they sort of reinforce the like historical accuracy of Scripture? And in short, yes, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff. There's way more evidence out there to support that the Bible is accurate and that Jesus was a real person, way more than Alexander the Great. So if you were to hold almost any other historical figure to the same sort of scrutiny that people hold Jesus to, you would have to reject the fact, like, did Abraham Lincoln even exist? You know? So I think what it shows is that there's a reason people want to hold a higher standard to the reality of like Jesus' existence. And understandably so, because if his claims are true, this kind of, I'll just kind of take this into the last little bit. Okay, you got a question. Let's do the question.
All right, great. I'm going to put two questions together. One from Kate Wellens and one from Jordan Dooley. Do you believe in a young or old Earth? And if you need me to expand on that, she has some good expansion. But also,
The
how
universe.
old is the Earth? And does this matter to why we believe that as Christians?
Put in the comments if we should do a whole episode on science. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, because I feel like we want to finish your thought and not go back to that.
Yeah, again, we have such a limited time to be able to delve into like all of these things, and I want to be able to hit on this and kind of bring it to completion. That we could probably talk for a whole hour just on that. So so
and offend a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. So we
We do like
appreciate
a
your
10-minute
questions.
smartphone.
We're not trying to dodge a bullet here. We want to address those things, but for time's sake and the limited time we have left, I think we have like a few minutes left. So we're just gonna have Eric finish this thought, and then
To address that question, I'm not gonna like answer the question, but a lot of questions kind of revolve around, you know, Genesis, creation, like all these different things that are like here and there and all over the place, and we can sit and we can talk about all the different details, but because maybe this is based on my own personal experience, but this has been the clearest thing to me, is that we can talk about those things all day and it's not going to really make a change. What we have to do is find the one like core crucial point that Scripture talks about. And so, like I said, the Bible's a collection of 66 books. It's written by 40 people from 3 different continents over nearly 2,000 years. And despite that, think about how crazy that is. Despite that, it has one fluid theme from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And it's pointing to one thing. From Genesis, it's pointing forward to Jesus. We could pull out examples from Genesis, and it's amazing. And then from Revelation and everything past Jesus is pointing back to Jesus. And then beyond to Jesus coming back again. And all in all, I mean, there's prophecies, there's everything. Everything is about this. Was Jesus really the Son of God? Did he come here to die for my sins? And I think the one thing that we can focus on above all this else is, did Jesus Christ really resurrect from the dead? And like that's a ludicrous idea to like scientific mind, like that just doesn't happen. And I acknowledge that, and I think we all acknowledge that, which is exactly why we have to focus in on it as a huge deal. We don't want to treat it like, oh, yeah, he resurrected. It's not like a big deal. It's easy to believe. It's like, no, everything in Scripture hinges on this idea. If Jesus really rose from the dead, for me, if Jesus if I can look at the resurrection, and if he really did raise from the dead, then I can accept all of this. I personally can. I don't have a problem with anything else. We can talk about creation, but I'm going to talk about creation through the lens of Jesus. And it's going to make it way easier for me to kind of deal with things like supernatural things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that you're communicating from like a historical, scriptural perspective, it's like all these evidences point to Jesus, like you're talking about, all these eyewitness accounts, you know, and even the disciples who like lived, like after Jesus died, like why would someone give their life to something like that? You know, I think of even like they'd be willing to give up everything for this like truth. And something that's always been encouraging for me to like read through and understand this is in Acts, after, you know, Peter and John are brought into the Sanhedrin and like persecuted for preaching in the colonnade, and they said one of the chief priests says this about them. He talks about two different men who rose up and brought a following, and then it eventually died off. And then so he says this: after this man, Judas the Galilean, rose up in the days of the census and attracted a following. He's also perished. So in the present case, I tell you, stay away from these men and leave them alone. For if this plan or this work is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think about that, and you think about historically, usually the victors, the conquerors are the ones who write history, but the Israelites and the Christians are not that way. They're the ones who were the persecuted, the judged, the condemned, the weak ones, you know, like the killed. I mean, even Jesus was crucified, and yet this book stands to tell the time, like that Jesus, you know, was God, that he came as a man, that we can believe that God exists, you know, through all of these evidences. And so
yeah, and I think just even beyond that, like you look at Peter, you look at Paul, you look at any of the apostles, all of them, minus John, took this to the grave. And they took it to the point where they were executed. And it begs the question, I know one of the biggest things, Caleb, that we've talked about is the most influential things is looking at the lives of the apostles and the change in their lives and the lives that we see around us. But Peter,
look, I mean, you think about how Peter. I know that we're running over time a little bit, but you think about Peter, the psychology of the disciples, and how Peter. I think it's John 20 verse 19. All of the apostles were up in the upper room after Jesus died, and they were scared because the Jews were going to kill him. And then, 43 days later, Peter stands in front of 10,000 people and preaches the gospel, and 3,000 people get saved. And it's like he had no fear, and he was shuddering with fear in that upper room, closed door lock. It's like that psychology of the believers and how they and following their lives throughout, or the disciples following their lives throughout, is a huge evidence without even talking about does Jesus' tomb actually exist? Did they actually roll a rock over it? Did they actually, it's like without bringing up some of those things. You just look at the psychology.
Paul. I hate the church. I want to kill everybody. I want to put them in prison. And then, a period of time later.
Just kidding.
I'm going to lead the charge of the missional movement of the early church all over the known world. It's like that doesn't just people don't just change their mind like that. Something happened. They had some sort of encounter.
I love that.
We could probably talk.
I'm holding my tongue. There's too many things to say.
We should probably.
All right.
Wrap it up.
Well, I think that'll kind of conclude our time together. We're so thankful that you're able to join us with our panel this evening. Such a joy to be able to share these things with you. I know that these kind of three hills that we've all had to climb in our own lives to really validate in our hearts that God is real, that he does exist. And for the believer, I hope this was encouraging for you. For the unbeliever, I hope that this was a little pebble that's in your shoe that's going to cause you to really think about this. And please feel free to message us on our Facebook page if you have more questions. We'd love to be able to either answer these things. We can't really meet in person because, you know, coronavirus. But anyway, again, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Caleb, thank you, Eric, for sharing all of this stuff. And make sure to tune in tomorrow if you want to join us for a devotional. That'll be on our Instagram page and our Facebook. Caleb's actually going to be doing the Devo tomorrow morning. Tune in at 9:38 a.m.
9:38, yeah.
9:38.
Ooh.
All right, we love you all. Thank you so much. See you next time.